Chapter 7. A Full Day. The noon meal was already well on its way to being prepared by the time Gus returned to the cook shack. Alex was standing in the house in the back door in the shack, holding several large baskets in his arms. "It's about time! Where you been? Goofing off again?" Just then Gus heard clanking and clomping the sound from behind him. "Haw, haw, let's go, Dick. Don't try to be stubborn there with me. Giddy up, Dee." Turning around, Gus could see Tommy bringing a large flat wagon out of the barn, pulled by Dick and Jim. "Pull together, Jim. Ha! Hey, dummy," called Alex to Gus. "You better get out of the way. Your friend will run you over." Moving aside, Tommy pulled the wagon up behind the cook shack. "Lend a hand, Gus," called Tommy. "We have to get these meals out to the cutting grounds for the axemen to eat." Tommy held the team still so the wagon could be loaded. In the kitchen, the large baskets of sandwiches and cookies and donuts were piled everywhere. Stacks of sliced bread still sat waiting to be packed, along with a wooden pail of jam and a crock of butter, condensed milk, long sweetened, and a workbox full of utensils. Gus took the baskets in the wagon as Tommy held the horse's reins. He gave the orders about packing the balanced load. Addie brought out 2 huge coffee pots that were still hot and steaming. "Those jacks sure like their black lead," thought Gus. "Be careful, boy," urged Addie. "These pots are hotter than fire itself. It's easy to get scalded if they spill." Addie struggled to slide the pots into the wagon bed with Gus's help. Dick and Jim pawed at the ground with their hooves as they waited patiently to pull their load into the woods. "Addie, can I go deliver lunches?" asked Gus. "Dinner it out?" "That's my job," interrupted Alex. "I do that with Tommy. You have to stay here and help serve the rest of the men that don't swing axes anyways. The men don't like greenhorns in the woods. It brings them bad luck." Just then Addie disappeared inside the door of the cook shack and reappeared with another basket. He shoved it into Alex's arms and directed him to get moving. Alex jumped onto the back of the wagon and threw himself up over the bench seat beside Tommy, looking back at Gus. He flashed a grin. Tommy slapped the back of the horses with the reins of the wagon slowly pulled away. The horse needed no guiding. Lifting their feet into the air at each step, they started down the well-trained tote road. The wagon squeaked and clanked and disappeared around the curve of the woods. At noontime, only a handful of men came to eat the cook shack this time. Gus was careful not to speak to any of the men. He poured the black lead and brought out great pots of stew. After the meal, Gus washed the tin cans for steaming tubs of soapy hot water. Then he dried them and set them back on the table for supper. Eddie watched in satisfaction as Gus completed his chores. "Now you're finished. I have work for you in the kitchen," said Addie, handing him an empty flour bag. "Here, tie it around you. Use it as your apron." These are pratties to peel. There are pratties to peel. Sitting in the kitchen floor were 2 bushels of potatoes and a big iron pot filled with cold water. "Peel the pratties and put them in the pot," Addie instructed. Gus sat down on the old crate and began peeling potatoes one at a time, over and over and over again. "Addie, don't get tired of working like this?" Gus asked. Addie, kneading the dough on a long wooden table, looked up at Gus and smiled. "What is there to life, boy, if you can't work? You know, me dear old ma once told me, God rest her soul, that the only thing you're going to get out of this life is a good meal. I feel like I'm doing a great service to these men by giving them just that." "You mean you want to do this for the rest of your life?" "Well, now, come to think of it, wouldn't mind settling down someplace with a homesteading, with a hard-working man, and raise myself a house full of children." "A hard-working man like Tommy, maybe?" Gus joked. Addie looked at Gus with a real twinkle in her eyes and kneaded the bread. As quick as a heartbeat, Addie reached over and picked up a damp towel from the breadboard and flung it across the table at Gus's head. Gus ducked and laughed. "You be minding your own business, Gus McCarty," said Addie, as she went back to kneading the bread, this time with a big smile on her face. Gus and Addie worked all afternoon together, stirring, baking, chopping, and peeling. Alice came in late afternoon carrying his empty baskets and dishes from the crew's noon meal. Seeing Gus elbow deep in potato peelings, he gave him a smart alecky grin. "Now that's what I like to see," said Alex. "A cook's helper helping." You button your lip, Alex, insisted Addie. Gus here has been working twice as fast as you ever did. And furthermore, when you're finished washing up those dishes from the chopping crew's dinner, I want you to chop a stack some more wood for the oven. Alex groaned and gave Gus a dirty look. I thought he was supposed to do the wood. You leave him be, young man. I have another job for him, too, snapped Addie. It's near time, Gus, said Addie, as she looked up at the old clock and sat on the shelf. I want you to be putting the pratties on the back stove and start 'em to boiling. Taking off your apron now and follow me to the barn. Just set those peelings aside. I'll be using them for soup tomorrow. Addie threw a shawl around her shoulders and picked up a tin pail. Alex, who now was washing dishes, started to laugh. Have fun, Gus. Closing the cook shack door behind him, Gus wondered what Alex meant. Hurrying to keep up with Addie, Gus noticed that she was keeping pace with the jogger, having trouble keeping up with her. She made her way to the barn, swinging up her pail as she went. Inside the barn, Gus saw Tommy rubbing down Dick and Jim's, putting bags full of feed around their heads to feed them. Hello, Tommy, called Gus. Tommy motioned Gus to keep up with Addie, who marched past the horse stalls and back to the barn. There inside the fence area were 2 cows. Boy, asked Addie, do you know how to milk? Milk? Asked Gus, horrified. Do you mean milk a cow? Well, she's not meaning to milk my horses, Tommy called, who followed the pair. You want me to milk both cows? If you can get milk out of both of them, Gus, you're a miracle worker. This is Ma, and the other one is her son, said Addie, as she pointed to the cows out to Gus. Gus looked at the white, black, spotted cows, who were both nearly the same age, or same size. I'll get them apart for you, Addie, said Tommy. You see, boy, even though her calf is near her size, he still tries to nurse to get her milk. He doesn't like that someone else wants it too. Tommy jumped over the gate into the fence area, running after the calf. He grabbed hold of its tail and pulled it in the opposite direction of its mother. Frightened, the calf turned and ran out the door into another fence pen. Tommy then threw the gate shut between the two. The cow named Ma stood there in the corner watching Tommy carefully. When Tommy got close to her, she ran in the opposite side of the barn. Now come on, Ma, show Gus what a nice girl you can be. The calf half mooed loudly, and his mother replied. Tommy picked up a handful of clean hay, waved it in front of Ma. This one here is a dumb animal. All she knows how to do is give milk and eat, laughed Tommy. The cow reached out with her nose and lifted her head, smelling the hay. Tommy poked it out farther from the front of her, and she nibbled on it. As she moved towards the hay, he grabbed the rope that hung around her neck and led her over to the manger. And then he tied her to her head between 2 poles and filled the manger with the hay and the grain. There you go, girl. It's time. Tommy looked at Addie and smiled. There's Ma for you, Addie. Addie came around behind the cow, and Gus followed far behind her, just in case the cow decided to kick. Just as Gus walked around, she lifted her tail. Watch it, called Tommy. She's got business to do. Oh, gross. Gus turned his head away, and Addie and Tommy laughed at him. Tommy took his shovel and shoveled the manure away. Addie placed a small 3-legged stool beside the cow. First, you have to let her know you're friendly like. Don't go making no sudden moves till she gets to know you. And don't go get too near her back legs. This one right here has been known to kick. You can ask Alex about that one, Tommy said with a smile. Addie sat down with the little stool, placed her tin pail under the cow, reached up and grabbed the cow's udder. Can you see how she's getting full? The udder in the cow hung loose and heavy from the cow's stomach. Oh, yuck. Do I have to do this? Pleaded Gus. You most certainly do. Now watch what I do, and then you can finish, said Addie. A boy your age should have been milking long ago. Addie grabbed the cow and pulled. First you squeeze, then you pull down. Squeeze, pull down. Squeeze, pull down. Addie turned the cow and rested her head against its side. With both her hands, she squeezed and pulled and squeezed and pulled and squeezed and pulled around the spraying milk could be heard in the pail. Wow, look at that, exclaimed Gus. Psst, 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 psst. The milk hit the tin pail, and Addie squeezed and pulled. I can sure tell you weren't raised on a farm, Gus, said Addie as she worked. Just then, Gus felt something nudge up against the back of his legs. Jumping back with a start, he turned to see Betty, the three-legged cat, brushing up against him. Gus reached down to pet the cat, who darted away when she saw his hand coming toward her. I wouldn't be doing that if I were you. She ain't no pet, said Tommy. She's only here because she heard the milk in the bucket. You just step aside and watch what happens. Gus stepped back, and Betty crept up and sat beside Addie. Addie smiled at the cat, who sat back wobbling, trying to balance on her hind good leg and her stub. She meowed and sniffed the air. Gus watched with surprise as Addie squirted milk right into Betty's face. The cat opened her mouth as milk splashed. The swatting steam of milk. She licked and licked and licked. And wobbling back and forth, with a thorough soaking, she jumped back and shook herself and then sat down and licked the milk from her fur. Gus had never seen anything like that before, and she was surprised that Addie and Tommy laughed at the poor three-legged cat as it lost its balance and fell backward, still licking her fur. Now it's your turn, Gus, said Addie, and she stood and moved away from the stool. All of a sudden, Gus was serious. My hands are cold. Does that matter? He asked as he rubbed them together. No, it doesn't matter. Ma's the least bit, said Addie with a smile. Gus sat down on the short stool to pull his head up beside Ma, reaching forward. Pull the cow. Squeeze, pull. Squeeze, pull. It's not working, said Gus. You're trying too hard, said Tommy. It's as easy as falling off a log. Pull easy, and it'll work. Gus squeezed lightly and pulled into the pail. It went. Squeeze, pull. This is fun, said Gus. Well, I'm glad you like it, boy. It'll be your job every morning, before breakfast, and every evening before supper, said Addie. With that, Addie walked off with Tommy by the horse stalls, where they talked quietly. Gus milked the cow until there was no more milk to give. In 10 minutes, he had filled the pail almost to the top. Looking around, Gus could see Addie and Tommy still talking and paying no attention to him. He stuck his finger in the pail. The milk felt warm. Pulling his finger out, he put it into his mouth, and it tasted like warm, sweet, creamy flavor of fresh milk. It seemed thick to him. It reminded him of butter. This is the real stuff, he thought. No plastic containers from the store here. This is neat. Gus patted the side of Ma, who was still munching on her food. She turned around and looked wide-eyed at Gus, as if giving her approval. Hey, called Gus to Addie, what do I do now? Tommy and Addie came over to admire a full pail full of milk, and Addie picked up and looked it over. Not much hair, not much dirt. Looks like a fresh, first-rate job to me. What do you think, Tommy? Tommy patted Gus on the back and helped him carry the pail of milk to the barn entrance. Now don't be sloshing the milk on the way to the cook shack, boy, he instructed, while Addie hurried ahead. Gus struggled with both hands to carry the pail back to the cook shack. Wait until Mom hears I milked a cow, thought Gus. She won't believe it. Just then another thought interrupted Gus' pride in his new accomplishment. A frown crossed his face. Just when was he going to see his mother again? When Gus entered the cook shack with the milk, he saw a big pile of wood, and Alex had chopped. It was nice and neatly piled along the stove and pushed back out of the way. On top of the stove, his pots of potatoes were cooking along with pots of boiling soup and stew. There was enough food to feed an army, Gus decided, but that was really what these men were, an army of lumberjacks. Addie, waiting for Gus's milk, took and poured it into another pail, which had a piece of cloth over it. Then she moved the cloth over the first pail and poured the milk back into it. She did this several times. This is to strain the hair and the dirt out of the milk, she explained to Gus. I'm going to cover this and set it on the back porch to cool. Tomorrow morning, after the cream rises off it, I'll make butter from the cream. Suddenly, Gus felt proud that he was able to contribute to the work at the cook shack. He turned just in time to hit the face with his flour bag apron. It was Alex. Come on, we got work to do, he insisted. The boys lugged big pots of bowls of food, beef stew that had been bubbling on the back of the stove most of the day. There were also Gus's boiled potatoes, canned tomatoes, bread and butter, huge wedges of pie. As soon as the food was on the table, Alex went back out the door, struck a large iron triangle with a hammer, calling the men to eat, standing aside. Gus counted 56 men. They all rushed past him with their places at the tables. Within minutes, their places had been heaping with food, almost bare, and the men were on their way to the bunkhouse. Gus and Alice worked side by side, stuffing themselves with leftovers as they washed, rinsed, and dried the dishes. After dishes were done, the places for breakfast were set and the floor swept. Gus went to the kitchen to see if Addie needed any more help. Addie was getting the big pots and pans set for the next day's meal. "You look like you can use some sleep, boy. Why don't you go join Tommy and the rest of the men in the bunkhouse? It's time to call it a day." Gus was glad to hear that. It had been a long, hard day. His feet hurt, his big, heavy boots. His hands hurt from peeling potatoes and milking the cow, and his stomach hurt from eating too many leftovers. Gus left the cook shack and crossed the yard into the bunkhouse. It was dark outside, and the cold, crisp air seemed to hold the promise of snow.